On my way home for Thanksgiving, I got into a serious accident. When the doctor called saying I needed emergency surgery, my parents, busy hosting their party, replied, "If she dies, let me know. I don't have time for paperwork." When I woke up, the chart said, "New legal guardian, M," and that guardian was. I remember the smell of burned rubber, the sting of cold air cutting into my lungs, and the desperate voices shouting over each other. But above all, I remember the sentence that carved itself into my bones. A sentence I didn't hear until much later, when the nurse finally told me, "If she dies, let me know. I don't have time for paperwork." Those were my mother's words. My own mother said this, while I lay crushed in a mangled car on Thanksgiving week. It was the kind of night that should have felt like any other. Rain drizzling, lights reflected on wet pavement. The sort of drive home that's almost meditative. But it wasn't. The sky had turned to the dull gray of storm clouds, and the roads slick with rain made the traffic feel slow and endless. I had just finished a long shift at base in Norfolk and was heading to my parents' house in Chesapeake, about a 40-minute drive away. I wasn't excited to be going home, but it was Thanksgiving. It was supposed to be a time for family. So I told myself I should show up, if only for the sake of the holiday. Maybe, I thought, it would feel different this time. Maybe things would be warm. But I should have known better. The drizzle hit the windshield in soft taps, the sound oddly soothing at first. Traffic crawled, a mix of minivans, pickup trucks, and service members like me, all trying to make it home. But the peace didn't last. A moment of calm was shattered when I saw the truck. A white Ford in the next lane suddenly swerved, fishtailing like a tail cutting through water. I barely had time to react. The truck slammed into my driver's side door with a sickening crack. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. My body was yanked violently forward, and then thrown back by the seatbelt. The world twisted sideways, and everything went silent. When sound returned, it wasn't quite right. It was fractured, like someone had turned the volume up and down at random. The first thing I heard was a horn blaring somewhere. Then a woman was screaming. Someone pounded on my window. I could smell gasoline, a hint of rain. My vision blurred in and out. I couldn't even tell where I was. The only thing I knew was the pain. My left arm felt like it was asleep numb. Every time I breathed, my ribs felt like they were being stabbed. "Mom, stay with me," a man's voice called, calm but focused. "Don't move. We're getting you out." I wanted to speak, but my mouth only formed shapes. No words came out. A paramedic climbed halfway through the broken doorframe and shone a light into my eyes. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Ellie," I managed to rasp out. My voice barely made it past my lips. "Ellie, we're taking you to the ER. Do you have family we can call?" "Parents, Thanksgiving," I whispered, my voice fading as darkness closed in again. And then everything went black. The next time I woke, it was in a dim hospital room. The beeping of machines filled the air, and I felt the tightness in my chest. The pain was unbearable. My ribs felt like they were encased in iron, my throat raw from the tubes they'd inserted to keep me breathing. My body was stitched together, aching in ways I couldn't even understand. I was confused at first. Then panic set in. Where was my family? I needed them. But when I asked the nurse about them, her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't come. My parents hadn't even bothered to show up. They'd been contacted, yes. But they didn't come. They didn't sign. The nurse said quietly, avoiding my eyes. They didn't. I repeated, barely understanding. They didn't sign the forms. They declined to be responsible for your surgery. Someone else did. Her words echoed in my head. The one person who had stepped up, who had cared enough to sign those papers, was a stranger. A stranger. I tried to focus. My heart sank as the nurse turned the clipboard around to reveal the name of my new guardian. Harold G. Bennett. I stared at the name for a long moment, trying to place it. Then, slowly, memories floated up. An old man with kind eyes. A crooked smile. His stubborn insistence that he didn't need help when he clearly did. I had met him years ago. Through a volunteer program, where I helped aging veterans with home repairs. He had been one of the first houses on our list, and I remembered spending an extra hour fixing his front ramp, making sure it was sturdy. He had been so grateful, so insistent on giving me lemonade and telling stories about Korea, about my grandfather. I never imagined he meant it when he said, "If you ever need anything, sailor, you call old Harold. We take care of our own." I hadn't called. But he had shown up for me, when my own parents hadn't. When I needed someone, Harold had stepped in, without hesitation, without asking anything in return. And now, he was the one who had signed to save my life. The words hit me like a punch. I didn't know what to feel. Shock, disbelief, something else. I couldn't tell. My parents, the ones who should have been there, had turned their backs. And this stranger, this old man I barely knew, had been the one to sign my life away. What kind of family were they? What kind of parents did that? The first time I woke up for real, I didn't know where I was. The lights above me were too bright, too white, and the hum of machines surrounded me like a buzz in my ears. It was cold. My body ached in ways I didn't understand, and I could feel the weight of something heavy in my chest, like an iron band around my ribs. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what was happening, and then the pain hit sharp, searing, making me gasp. And that's when I remembered. The accident. I was still trying to make sense of it all when a nurse came into the room, her footsteps soft on the tile floor. She adjusted the IV in my arm without speaking, her presence warm and comforting in contrast to the sterile, metallic smell of the hospital. The beeping of the monitors was the only sound for a moment, and it felt like time was stretching out. "Hey, you're awake," she said gently, her voice kind. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I whispered, my throat sore, my mouth dry. She gave a soft laugh, clearly used to hearing that response from accident victims. "Well, you almost were. You're in the hospital. You've had surgery. Everything's okay now." "Surgery?" I tried to sit up, but the pain made me freeze. My body was a battlefield of aches and tightness, and the sheer effort of moving made me want to collapse back into the bed. The nurse adjusted my pillows, her hands careful as she made sure I was comfortable. I could feel the weight of something cold against my side, probably a bandage, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going anywhere. "Where's my family?" I asked, the words barely making it past my lips. She hesitated, just long enough for me to know something was wrong. "They were contacted," she said, her eyes darting away for a second before meeting mine. But they didn't come. I blinked at her, trying to process the words. What do you mean, they didn't come? She paused again, her expression softening. Your parents were contacted. But they didn't come. They didn't sign the consent forms for the surgery either. They declined to take responsibility. I stared at her, my mind reeling. I felt numb, like I couldn't understand her words, even though I could hear them clearly. What? They didn't. She nodded, a slight frown tugging at her lips. No. Someone else did. Someone who was here. They stepped in. A sinking feeling started in my chest, and I couldn't even breathe properly. I wanted to ask more, but the words stuck in my throat. My parents, my mother, my father, hadn't shown up for me. They hadn't been there when I needed them most. I was dying on a hospital bed, and they were too busy with their party to care. I had always known they were distant, but this was different. I looked at the nurse, my voice barely above a whisper. Who signed for me? She hesitated, then gently turned a clipboard around so I could see. The name written there was one I hadn't expected. Harold G. Bennett. I didn't even register the name at first. It took me a moment to match it to a face. An old man with kind eyes, a crooked smile. He'd been a veteran I met during a volunteer program to fix up homes for aging veterans. His house had been on the list. I remembered helping him with his ramp. Him insisting he could still swing a hammer despite his bad hip. We talked about our shared connection to my grandfather, who had served in the same unit as Harold during the Korean War. He'd always been kind, but I never imagined he'd come to my rescue. Mr. Bennett? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. The nurse smiled softly. Yes. He was here when the doctor was trying to reach your parents. He overheard the conversation and stepped in. He signed the consent forms. Ellie, he's been here every day, sitting by your side. I blinked at the nurse, trying to process everything she was telling me. But why? Why would he do that for me? She shrugged, a small, knowing smile on her face. You'd have to ask him. But I think he just wanted to help. You're lucky. He saved your life. Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a forgotten daughter, abandoned by the people who should have cared the most. My parents had turned away. Too absorbed in their own world to even acknowledge my life was on the line. And here was a man, an old veteran, a stranger in many ways, who stepped in without hesitation, without thinking about what it would cost him. Where is he? I asked, suddenly desperate to see him. The nurse glanced at the chair beside my bed, where a thin blanket was folded neatly over the armrest. A coffee cup sat in the trash can empty. She looked back at me. He went home to rest. He said he'd be back tomorrow. Tomorrow. Harold Bennett, the man who hadn't known me beyond a few hours of conversation, was more of a family to me than my own blood. The truth of it hit me all at once, like the full weight of my injuries. It wasn't just that they had failed me. It was the realization that they had always failed me. And now, someone who wasn't even part of my family, had stepped up in their place. My body hurt, but it was the ache in my heart that cut deepest. Harold Bennett didn't show up the next day. Or the day after. The pain was still there, sharp and constant. But it wasn't just my body that was hurting. My mind kept replaying everything: the accident, my parents' callousness, and the fact that I had been saved by a stranger. I spent the next few days in a fog, floating in and out of consciousness. The painkillers made everything feel distant, as if I were watching my life from the outside. But every time I woke up, the harsh reality of the situation would hit me again. My parents had been contacted, but they hadn't come. They hadn't signed the papers. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head, her dismissive tone, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience to her social plans. If she dies, let me know. I don't have time for paperwork. That line echoed over and over, getting louder each time. It didn't make sense. How could someone say something like that about their own child? How could they just walk away? The only thing keeping me tethered to the present was the quiet presence of Harold Bennett. Even though he wasn't there every day, he had somehow become the anchor I didn't know I needed. His visits, even if brief, had a grounding effect on me. There was a steady rhythm to them. He would show up, sit in the chair by my bed, talk about the weather or about the old neighborhood. He wasn't much for small talk, but he was always there, a constant. One day, when I was awake for longer stretches, he finally came back. "Look at you," he said with that familiar grin, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're starting to look like you're alive again. How's the pain?" "Better," I muttered, though the ache in my chest said otherwise. "It still feels like someone's squeezing me, but I can breathe better." He nodded, taking a seat in the chair beside me. "You've got some fight in you, Ellie." "I can see that." I wasn't sure what to make of that. I wasn't sure what kind of fight I had left. My parents had taken that from me, in a way. They had always been distant, always prioritizing appearances. And their lack of care was a blow that stung deeper than the crash itself. "What did you mean by you take care of our own?" I asked him one afternoon, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Harold glanced at me, his expression softening. "You don't remember." "I said it the day you fixed my ramp." I nodded. "I remember that. But you said it again when you signed the papers." "I've never heard anyone talk like that about family." He chuckled, a low, gruff sound. "That's because family's not just about blood, kiddo. It's about who shows up when you need them. It's about being there, no matter what." I looked at him, confused. I had heard people say similar things before, but they had never meant it the way Harold did. He wasn't just giving me some idealistic speech about family. He was living it. He was proving it with his actions. And I hated myself for needing that so badly. For craving the connection that had been so absent in my own home. "You don't have to do this, you know," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "I'm not your responsibility." Harold waved a hand dismissively. "Don't you go getting any ideas. You didn't ask for my help, but you're sure as hell gonna get it now. I told you once, and I'll tell you again, we take care of our own." His words hit me hard. I'd spent so much time wondering why my parents never showed up, why they never cared enough to even check in on me. But Harold, he didn't have to be here. He could have stayed away, left me to figure things out on my own. But he didn't. He didn't turn away when it got hard. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace, even if it was fleeting. The days bled together, marked only by Harold's visits, and the constant buzz of machines in my room. He brought me more homemade soup, and though I could barely eat solid food yet, I appreciated the gesture. He would sit and talk about the past, telling me stories about his time in Korea, about how my grandfather had once saved his life during a mission. And he told me how my grandfather had spoken about family like it was something sacred, something you didn't take for granted. I didn't know it at the time, but that was when I began to understand what Harold meant by family. It wasn't about who shared your last name or who you were born to. It was about the people who show up. The ones who step in when you're at your lowest. The ones who refuse to walk away. But as much as I appreciated his presence, I still couldn't shake the bitter taste of my parents' abandonment. Every day, I could feel the weight of it pressing on me. It wasn't just the physical pain of my injuries. It was the realization that I had spent my entire life chasing approval from people who couldn't even be bothered to care whether I lived or died. One evening, I asked the nurse again about my parents. I needed to know if they'd at least made an effort to call, even if they hadn't come. I needed some shred of decency from them. She hesitated, just long enough for me to know the answer. They called, she said, her tone careful. But they didn't want to take responsibility for your care. They declined everything. It was Harold who stepped up. Her words were like a slap to the face, and I felt the tears start to gather behind my eyes. But I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I clenched my fists, holding back the sting, feeling my resolve harden inside me. Harold Bennett had been there for me. And my parents, they had not. The more I lay in that hospital bed, the more the truth settled in. My parents had refused to be there for me in my darkest moment. They had declined responsibility, chosen a party over their daughter's life, and they hadn't even bothered to show up. I tried to shake it off, but every time I thought about it, I felt a weight in my chest, like a knot I couldn't untangle. Harold's presence was the only thing that grounded me. His visits became a kind of anchor. I could rely on him. I could count on him. That realization felt both foreign and comforting. Every day, I grew stronger physically, but emotionally, I was a mess. I had no idea how to make sense of everything that had happened. My own family had let me down. And yet, this stranger, who barely knew me, had stepped up when I needed someone the most. One afternoon, as the sun filtered in through the blinds, I stared at the clock on the wall, watching the seconds tick by. The nurse came in to adjust my IV, checking my vitals as she did. Her movements were mechanical, practiced, but there was a softness in her eyes when she glanced at me. "Do you need anything?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head. "Just some answers." She hesitated, then sat down in the chair beside my bed. "I know you're going through a lot right now," she said softly. "And I'm not sure how to say this, but you don't have to go through this alone." I looked at her, confusion furrowing my brow. "What do you mean?" She glanced at the door, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "There are people here who care about you, even if your family hasn't shown up. People like Mr. Bennett. He's been here every day, Ellie. He's been by your side when no one else was." The words hung in the air, settling heavily in my mind. Harold had been there for me, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared. No one had ever done that for me before. Not my parents, not my sister, just him. I couldn't help it. The tears came, slow at first, then faster as the weight of everything I'd been holding back flooded out. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't ashamed. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel the pain, the betrayal, and the overwhelming sadness that had been building inside me. I don't know how to feel, I whispered through my tears. I just am. I never thought it would be like this. The nurse placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and reassuring. It's okay. Take your time. It's okay to feel everything. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. My emotions were all over the place: anger, confusion, hurt. How could my parents do this to me? How could they choose a fundraiser, a party, over their own daughter? Maybe you don't have to make sense of everything right now, the nurse said, giving me a small smile. You've been through a lot. Just focus on getting better, okay? I didn't say anything in reply. What was there to say? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I was hurt, and that hurt was starting to settle into something darker, something heavier. The next day, Harold came back, like he always did. This time, he had a small bag of homemade chicken soup, the kind that smelled so good I could almost taste it before it even touched my lips. You look better today, he said, setting the bag down on the table beside my bed. Your color's coming back. Thanks. I mumbled, my voice still rough. I reached for the soup, trying not to let the tears come again. But I couldn't help it. Every time I saw him, the tears seemed to follow. He sat down next to me, his presence solid and steady. You don't have to keep pretending everything's okay, Ellie. I've been where you are. I know how hard it is to accept the things that hurt us the most. I stared at him, his words catching me off guard. You've been where I am. He nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. I've had family walk away too. It's not easy. But you have to learn to let them go, for your own peace. And you have to understand something important. They're not the ones who decide your worth. You are. His words sank in deeper than I wanted to admit. I had spent my whole life chasing after approval, looking for love and validation from people who never gave it to me. And now, Harold was telling me something I wasn't ready to hear, that my worth wasn't determined by them. It was mine to define. I don't even know who I am anymore, I whispered. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Harold smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile I expected. It was softer, more knowing. You don't need to have all the answers right away. Right now, you just need to focus on healing. And when you're ready, you'll know what to do. But whatever happens, I'll be here. We take care of our own. I nodded, feeling the tightness in my chest ease, just a little. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something. Something I hadn't realized I needed until now. As the days passed, I started to see things differently. The more Harold talked about his life, about his family, the more I understood that blood didn't make a family. It was the people who showed up. The ones who cared. The ones who didn't walk away when things got hard. And for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start building my own family. One that didn't depend on the people who had already let me down. But it wasn't going to be easy. There was still a long road ahead of me, filled with questions and decisions I wasn't ready to make. And deep down, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. When the social worker came to see me, I was ready, Em. It was time to make the changes that needed to be made. It was time to take control of my own life. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of the people who had never been there for me. The next few days were an odd mixture of restlessness and disbelief. My body was healing, but my mind was in turmoil. The realization of what had happened, the fact that my parents had turned away from me when I needed them most, kept replaying in my head like a broken record. I kept asking myself how it was possible. How could they do that? How could they choose a party over their daughter's life? But then there was Harold. His visits were a small but constant reminder that maybe, just maybe, family wasn't defined by who you were born to. Family was the people who showed up, no matter what. And he had showed up. As the days passed, I began to feel the weight of my situation lifting, just a little. Harold's presence helped. But I still couldn't shake the hollow feeling left by my parents' indifference. The more I thought about it, the more the anger swelled inside me. I had always known that my parents were distant, but I never realized how much they had taken me for granted until now. One afternoon, as I was sitting up in bed trying to eat a little bit of the soup Harold had brought me, the door to my room opened. I looked up, half expecting to see him standing there with his usual warm smile. But instead, it was my sister, Stephanie. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and something else. I couldn't place it. She didn't look concerned, not really. It was more like she was checking in on some sort of obligation. She was wearing her usual designer coat, her heels clicking sharply against the hospital floor as she made her way over to the chair by my bed. Well, she said flatly, look who's alive. How's the great hero? I blinked at her, trying to make sense of the words. Was she serious? I hadn't expected her to show up, but I also hadn't expected her to be so cold. I'm fine, I said, my voice hoarse. Better. She sat down without saying anything else for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. The silence between us grew thick, uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke again, her tone as dismissive as ever. Mom wanted me to stop by. She's been really stressed out with everything going on. You know, the hospital bills, the whole mess. She said, you should be back on your feet soon. It's really hurting her image, you know. I stared at her. What do you mean, hurting her image? I was in surgery. I almost died. She waved a hand dismissively, like it wasn't a big deal. Doctors exaggerate, Ellie. You know how hospitals are. They just want signatures and paperwork. It's not like you were really in danger. Anyway, you're lucky the surgery went well. You should thank your military insurance for that. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of disbelief and anger. I almost died, Stephanie. You're not hearing me. You don't get it. She rolled her eyes, clearly uninterested. You're being dramatic, as usual. Anyway, Mom said you can come home whenever you're discharged. We're having a brunch for Christmas, and she wants everyone to look presentable. You know, for the guests. So, try to heal fast. We need you to pull it together. My chest tightened at her words. It wasn't even the tone of her voice that bothered me. It was the fact that she was so consumed with how things looked, with how our family appeared to others. The fact that she had no idea what I had just been through, and instead was worried about how it would affect her social life. "That's why you came here?" I asked quietly, though the words felt like they were being dragged from me. "To ask me to make sure everything's covered by my insurance." She hesitated for just a moment before answering, her gaze flicking to the floor. "Well, yeah. I mean, it's easier for you to handle it. And Mom said you should do it anyway. We need to make sure everything's paid for, you know." I didn't even know what to say. The anger inside me swelled, but this time, it wasn't just anger. It was sadness. The kind of sadness you feel when you realize that the people who are supposed to care about you, the ones who should be your support system, are nothing more than selfish, entitled individuals who only care about how things affect them. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't going to cry, not in front of her. I refused to let her see the hurt, the betrayal. I had already given them too much of my life, too much of myself. And now, I wasn't going to let them take any more. "Get out," I said, my voice calm but firm. Stephanie raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." I said get out. I repeated, my voice steady. "I'm done." She stared at me for a moment, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What's your problem?" "I'm just trying to help." I shook my head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "No, you're not trying to help. You're trying to manage everything like it's just some inconvenience for you. You're not worried about me. You're worried about how things look, so, just leave. I don't need your help. I don't need any of this." She stood up, her face flushed with irritation. "You've changed," she said, crossing her arms. "Ever since you joined the Navy, you've been so dramatic. I don't even recognize you anymore." "Good," I replied, my voice as cold as I could make it. "You're not supposed to recognize me." Without another word, she turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her. I sank back into the pillows, trying to control the storm of emotions inside me. But it didn't hurt anymore. Not in the same way. Harold was right. I had to stop pretending. My family might never change, but I didn't have to keep chasing their approval. I was done. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start building something real, something that had nothing to do with them. Something that was just mine. The day I decided to confront my parents, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had spent so much of my life wondering if there was ever going to be a moment when I could stand up for myself, when I could look them in the eye and demand the truth be heard. This was it. This was the moment. I sat in Harold's car, the engine idling in the driveway, watching the house I had grown up in. The house that used to feel like home. Now, it looked cold, distant, like something I no longer recognized. The warm glow of the Christmas lights, twinkling on the roof, didn't comfort me. It only felt hollow. Fake. A perfect, polished image, hiding what was inside. Harold turned to me, his eyes soft with understanding. "You sure about this, Ellie?" I swallowed hard, trying to push the knot in my throat down. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I've got to do this." He nodded, giving me a small smile. "I'll be right here when you're ready to come back out." I didn't say anything in response. Instead, I took a deep breath, grabbed the handle of the car door, and stepped out. The cold air hit me immediately, making me shiver. But I didn't let it distract me. I walked toward the door, each step sending a sharp H through my ribs. The pain was nothing compared to what I was about to face, though. When I reached the front door, I hesitated for just a second. The memories hit me in a rush. Thanksgiving dinners, my mother's perfect table settings, my father's stiff, distant smile. I could almost hear the sounds of my mother, rehearsing her speeches in front of the mirror, trying to get everything just right for the guests. I pushed the door open. The house was exactly as I remembered, warm, inviting, full of laughter. But it wasn't real. The clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, it all felt like background noise to a show I no longer wanted to be a part of. And when my mother saw me, her expression froze for just a moment before she replaced it with something that could only be described as forced politeness. "Oh, you're here," she said, her smile stretching a little too wide. "Good, good. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, and the room fell silent. My father, standing by the fireplace with a brandy glass in hand, looked at me for a moment before muttering, "You look fine." See, doctors always exaggerate. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, but I stayed calm. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. "I need to talk to everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the uncomfortable quiet. My mother groaned softly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ellie. Can't you save the drama for later? We're about to have dessert." I ignored her, scanning the room. My cousin's eyes widened when she saw me standing there. "Ellie, you're walking." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the eyes of every person in that room on me. I wasn't going to back down, not this time, not anymore. "Everyone, listen," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not here to make things easy. I'm here to tell the truth." My mother's smile faltered, and she crossed her arms. "Ellie, don't be so dramatic. We're having a nice evening." But I wasn't going to let her sweep this under the rug. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed transcript from the hospital. The one that had been seared into my memory. The one with my mother's words on it. "I almost died, Mom," I said, my voice rising with the anger I had been holding in for so long. "And this is what you said." I held up the paper, reading aloud. "If she dies, let me know. I don't have time for paperwork." The room went dead silent. My mother's face drained of color, and my father's mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to come up with something, anything, to say. My cousin gasped. My aunt looked like she might faint. But my parents, they were just standing there, looking at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Do you have anything to say for yourselves?" I asked, my voice growing firmer. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to act like this didn't happen. You left me to die, and I want you to hear it." The room was still. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. He was embarrassed, I could tell. But there was no apology. No remorse. "This is all very dramatic, Ellie," he said, as if I was the one causing a scene. "Don't make a bigger deal out of it." I took a step forward, not letting the anger overwhelm me, but letting it fuel me instead. I'm done with this. I'm done with pretending we're a family, when we're not. I'm done with trying to earn your love, your attention. You're not my emergency contacts anymore. You're not my decision makers, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me into staying in this toxic cycle. My mother opened her mouth to argue, But I held up my hand, stopping her. No, I said firmly. I've made my decision. I turned to the rest of the room, my gaze sweeping across the faces of my relatives, who were all watching in stunned silence. And I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. Because I'm finally learning what it means to take care of myself. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. My father looked furious, embarrassed. My mother's lips trembled. And Stephanie, standing off to the side, looked like she was trying to decide whether to make a sarcastic comment or just keep quiet for once. I turned away from them, walking slowly to the door. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their approval. What I needed was to leave. I wasn't running away anymore. I was walking towards something better. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wave, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. Harold was waiting in the car, just like he promised. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't need to. He knew what I needed. As I climbed into the car, I felt the weight of the past few years fall away, just a little. It wasn't over yet, but I was getting closer. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking into the lion's den. I felt like I was walking toward myself. The drive back to Harold's house was a quiet one. I didn't say much, and neither did he. The car hummed gently along the road, the low growl of the engine, the only sound filling the space between us. The cold air outside felt sharper as we drove, and every tree and house we passed looked like a blur, faded and distant. I wasn't looking at the world outside, though. I was focused on what had just happened, the confrontation, the release. The weight that had finally been lifted from my chest. I kept replaying the look on my mother's face, the way her smile had frozen when I held up that hospital transcript. The disbelief in her eyes when I called her out. When I finally told her how much she had hurt me. The rest of the room had been silent, shocked, but my parents, my mother, especially, couldn't hide the truth anymore. She had chosen a party over me. She had chosen her reputation over her own daughter's life. When we pulled into the driveway, Harold parked the car and turned off the engine. But I stayed sitting for a moment, staring out through the windshield. "You did good, kid," he said softly, breaking the silence. "You're stronger than you think." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what I felt. Relief, anger, exhaustion, all mixed together. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. Trying to please people who would never be pleased. And now, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to live up to anyone else's expectations. I didn't have to pretend. I wasn't their disappointment anymore. I looked over at Harold, his eyes steady and warm in the dim light of the car. It's just hard to accept. After all these years of trying to get them to notice me, to care about me, I finally realized they never will. Harold nodded slowly, like he understood more than he was saying. "They're not the ones who get to decide your worth, Ellie. You do. You've got to start seeing yourself the way I see you. Strong. Capable. Someone who doesn't need anyone to tell her she matters. Because you do." The words were like a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was still raw. They were simple, but they hit deep. I didn't have to keep fighting for something that wasn't there. I didn't have to keep chasing a dream of family that would never come true. After a moment, I opened the car door and stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. It felt good, this cold. It felt like a fresh start. Harold got out and walked around to meet me by the car, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "How are you feeling now?" he asked, his voice low and caring. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm scared. But also relieved. I've been holding this all in for so long, and I didn't realize how much it was weighing me down." "Good," he said, his tone firm. "You should be scared. Change is scary. But you're walking through it. And that takes guts. You're not running away anymore, Ellie. You're moving forward." I didn't have an answer to that. Instead, I walked with him toward the house. The gravel crunching under our feet as we made our way up the path. The house was warm. The smell of something cooking inside already reaching my nose. And I could hear the faint murmur of the TV in the living room. For the first time since my accident, I felt like I could relax. The world wasn't perfect, but for the first time, I wasn't looking for someone else to fix it. Harold made his way to the kitchen, putting down his coat and setting the pot he'd brought home on the counter. He made some grumbling noises as he turned on the stove, the familiar rhythm of his movements almost comforting. I watched him for a moment before sliding into one of the chairs at the kitchen table, my body sore and my mind still spinning from everything that had happened. Harold had always been a steady presence in my life, but now, in the silence of this small, cluttered kitchen, I realized that he wasn't just here because he was obligated. He was here because he cared. "I'm not sure what comes next," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Harold looked over at me, his face softened by the warm light of the kitchen. "What comes next is up to you, Ellie. You've taken the first step. It's a long road from here, but you don't have to walk it alone. You've got people in your corner now." I nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. It wasn't with my parents, and it wasn't with the image they had tried to craft for me. It was here, with Harold. In a place where I could breathe and be myself without the weight of other people's expectations bearing down on me. Thanks," I said quietly, feeling the words stir something deep inside me. "Thanks for being here." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "You don't need to thank me. We take care of our own, remember." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease, just a little. The ache in my body was still there, but now it was something I could manage. I wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. I spent time in the kitchen with Harold, learning to cook small meals as he kept a watchful eye on me. He never pressured me to talk more than I was ready to. But I felt him there, a steady presence that let me know I didn't have to carry everything on my own. The phone never rang from my parents. No apologies came through. The holidays came and went without a word from them. But that didn't matter anymore. I had learned something important. I wasn't responsible for their choices, only my own. And in the quiet of that small kitchen, I realized that I was finally free from the past, free from the people who never really saw me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live. A week later, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, staring out the window at the fading winter light. The world outside was cold and still, but inside, things were starting to shift. My ribs still ached with each breath, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness that had hung over me for so long. The guilt, the longing, the uncertainty, I was starting to let it go. I could feel it in my bones. The past few weeks had changed me, in ways I hadn't expected. I had always thought that forgiveness was something that had to come from the other person. That, somehow, my parents had to apologize, had to show me that they understood the hurt they had caused. But now, I realized that I was the one who needed to forgive. Not for them, but for myself. I wasn't going to wait around for an apology anymore. I wasn't going to hold on to the hope that things would magically get better with them. They had shown me who they were. And I had shown them who I was. That was enough. Harold had offered me a place to stay until I felt strong enough to return to base housing, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself accept help. I didn't have to do everything alone. It was hard at first, feeling like I was imposing on him, but every day, I felt the weight of my old life lift a little more. I spent time with him, helping him around the house, listening to his stories, and slowly letting the tension in my shoulders ease. One evening, after dinner, I sat on the couch with Harold, my legs stretched out, a blanket wrapped around me. The TV played softly in the background, but neither of us were really watching. I felt comfortable in the silence, in the space we shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "How's the healing coming along?" Harold asked, glancing over at me. I stretched my legs out, testing how they felt. The ache in my ribs had dulled to a manageable level, and the soreness in my body was fading. Better. Not perfect, but I'm getting there. "You'll be back to full strength before you know it," he said with a grin, his voice warm with quiet encouragement. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I think I'm starting to believe that." It was strange, though. I wasn't just healing physically. Something inside me had shifted too, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't feel the weight of expectation hanging over me anymore. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I had always thought that my worth was tied to my family, to their approval. But now I understood that I didn't need them to tell me I was enough. I had finally realized that I was enough, just as I was. The days passed, and I started feeling stronger. Harold kept a steady rhythm to his visits, showing up at the same time each day, bringing more of his home-cooked meals, offering his quiet wisdom when I needed it most. He didn't try to fix things for me. He didn't try to tell me what I should do. He just showed up, and somehow, that was all I needed. One morning, after I had just finished my breakfast, the phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I glanced at it, and a familiar name flashed on the screen. My mother. I stared at the phone for a long moment. It was the first time I had heard from her since the hospital, since I had walked away from that confrontation. Part of me wanted to ignore it, wanted to pretend that it wasn't there, that I didn't have to face it. But then I remembered what Harold had said. "You've got to start seeing yourself the way I see you, strong, capable, someone who doesn't need anyone to tell her she matters." I reached for the phone and answered it. "Ellie." My mother's voice came through, frantic and defensive. "I can't believe you did that to us. You humiliated your father and me in front of the whole family. You aired our dirty laundry. You don't understand how hard this has been for us." We've been getting calls. People asking us why we didn't take care of you. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. I understand perfectly, Mom. You chose a party over me. You chose your reputation over your daughter's life. I'm not asking for sympathy. I just needed the truth to be heard. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, shaky and unsure. You don't understand how stressful it was for us. You're our daughter. We should have been there for you. No, I said, my voice steady. You're not my family anymore. You haven't been for a long time. You're just people who share my last name. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I heard something real in it. You're choosing that old man over us, Em. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I didn't let it stop me. I'm choosing the person who showed up when you didn't. I'm choosing the person who cares, who doesn't need to make excuses. I'm choosing the person who's been there for me, even when you weren't. The line was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice lower. I don't know how to fix this, Ellie. I don't know how to fix what we've done. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words settle over me. You don't fix it with one call or one brunch. It takes time. But if you want to have any kind of relationship with me, it has to start with showing up. No audience. No performance. Just you. Just us. There was another long pause. I don't know if your father can do that, she said quietly. Then maybe it has to start with you. I replied, my voice firm. The phone stayed silent for a moment before she finally said, would you be willing to talk again sometime? Just you and me. I could feel the old pull to fall back into the familiar, to take the offer, but I held myself steady. I'll think about it, but I won't go back to the old pattern. I won't be your prop. Fair enough, she said softly. Merry Christmas, Ellie. Merry Christmas, Mom, I replied, my voice steady. And with that, I ended the call. The weight of it didn't hit me right away. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the world outside, letting the silence fill the space. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for something to change. I was ready to change myself. Harold walked into the kitchen just then, his eyes bright as he looked at me. Well, that sounded different, he said with a raised eyebrow. I nodded slowly. Different, but maybe that's the point. He smiled and patted me on the back. You've come a long way, Ellie. You're getting stronger every day. And now you've got something better than family. I looked up at him, feeling something inside me settle, like the final pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Yeah, I said. I've got a family that shows up. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I wasn't sure if my parents would ever change, or if I would ever hear from them again. But I did know this. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I was building my own life, and the only thing that mattered now was making sure that I was the one who showed up for myself. The rest of the year passed quietly, but I felt a new peace inside me. The Christmas dinner with Harold and the small circle of people who had become my new family was simple. The food wasn't fancy, but it was honest. And as we sat around the table, laughing, telling stories, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and for the first time, I was finally free.